hopped on. Oh, here we
All
go.
right, we're live.
Okay.
All right. Awesome. So welcome everyone to Let's Talk Coronavirus. We're calling this one the Alumni Edition. So we have a hopefully very compelling show for you today that you will find compelling. And just to get us started off, I'm going to pass you off to my co-host here, Rachel Bergstrom, and let Rachel tell you a little bit about what's going on. But first, my name is Ron. I'm Ron Watson, and I am Associate Professor of Political Science and Health and Society here at Beloit College. Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Bergstrom. I'm Associate Professor of Biology, and I also teach in the Health and Society program as well. I teach emerging diseases, so this is it, people. So behind me, I've got some pictures of our topic of conversation for today. We've got a transmission electron microscope image of the virus here and a scanning electron microscope image there. And so I'm very excited about this. Thank you for joining us today. This is, as Ron said, our Alumni Edition. We have 5 Beloit College alumni who are with us today in various different forms. And so we're going to introduce them each along the way. They all have varied experiences living with the pandemic right now and some very interesting stories. So we're going to start out with some oh, I should have gotten this ready. Sorry, we're going to start out with some videos of some interviews that we recorded with people who are unable to be with us today. Sorry, I'm getting this set up here over on my other screen. So these are 2 relatively recent graduates, and our first guest, I'll let him introduce himself, and then Ron and I will talk. Oh, sorry, Whitney, we need screen sharing. Sorry. So Ron, our first guest is Iga He. He lives in Shenzhen, China. And Ron, what were some of the things that we were able to talk about with Iga?
Well, we asked him a bunch of questions about the sort of news that he was either getting about the United States and the situation with COVID-19 here, but we also asked about the situation on the ground. During our first attempt at the interview, I asked him a little bit about, excuse me, asked him a little bit about the situation with foreigners, particularly those of African origin who were, the news reports were telling us that they were being sort of denied access to a variety of different places and so on and so forth. And a lot of this is out of concern, at least ostensibly out of concern for sort of foreign nationals and foreign workers bringing the virus back into China, right? But again, it's a very clear sort of, racial divide and racial element here. But at any rate, but we talked about that and a variety of other things, right? Including how he's feeling about the information that he was getting from the government as well. So yeah, it was a really enlightening conversation.
One of the other things that Iga and I were able to talk about, and it doesn't look like we're going to be able to share this video, unfortunately, but one of the other interesting things that Iga and I were able to talk about is early on towards the beginning of the semester when the outbreak was brand new, Iga sent me an email. He was in my emerging diseases class last semester, and he sent me an email asking me about the CDC guidelines for mask wearing. And at the very beginning, he was talking about how different it is in his experience to be living in China, where they are all wearing masks, and that's something that is considered polite and important for being out in public. And so he was wondering about why the CDC was not recommending that we wear masks. So he finds it really fascinating that we've now shifted in the way that we're approaching masks now. And so I did ask him, is he wearing mask when he's going out? And he says, oh yes, definitely. So it sounds like from his perspective, one of the things that he's experiencing right now is they're towards the end of the outbreak in his area. So Shenzhen is in Guangdong province, which is down by Hong Kong. So this is south of Hubei province, the epicenter of the outbreak. He says that life is pretty much back to normal now after months of lockdown. But he said that going out to eat still is difficult because it's just one person per table right now. So
yeah, that's right.
so I thought that that was really interesting. And I thought that that potentially gives us a heads up about what it might be like for us as we come off of the restrictions. Which were, Ron, did you hear that Wisconsin has just extended until May 26th, our stay-at-home order?
I did. I heard that actually about an hour ago. So yeah, I mean, I'm interested to hear people's thoughts about this, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, at any rate, we'll get to that at some point, I think, right?
Yeah. Well, and so our second guest, and I'm sorry again that we don't have a video, but I want to give an overview of this because we spoke with Larkin Myers, who's a 2017 graduate who's living out in Portland. She's working as a receptionist at a healthcare group. And has been pulled in to do some work with a call-in center for coronavirus. And so, Ron, what were some of the things that you thought were exciting and interesting about our conversation with her?
Well, I mean, the key thing for me was how, as an essential worker, people like Larkin have just stepped up in this amazing way, right? Who went from working regular hours to suddenly being told, oh, you know, we're going to need you to pull these massive shifts, and we're going to need you to help start up a call center and figure this out, you know, sort of as we're doing it. And rather than sort of balking on that, that Larkin just sort of stepped into that space. I've just been sort of amazed by that generally, but also just the medical group that she's a part of, just the how can I say this? The really sort of assertive steps that they took to try to get a handle on this, to try to get to create a source of reliable information for those people that they cover, to really be able to determine whether or not they were sick. I actually thought that's again a really sort of forward-thinking, fast-moving move that they made. That is, I think, probably going to pay off in the end.
Right, and one of the really exciting things that she was talking about was this drive-through testing.
Yeah, sure.
I'm just wondering how long it's going to be before we start having drive-through testing in the Midwest, because I've been hearing about that on both of the coasts. We just don't, we of course don't have that in Beloit right now, but
no.
I'd be interested to hear from people who are watching right now. Have you in your area seen drive-through testing, or do you know of an increase of testing in your particular area? And what does that look like? Be very interested to hear about that.
Right on.
So I think that Iga and Larkin are two great examples of things that Beloiters do after they graduate. And most importantly, they're experiencing this outbreak much like everybody else. The difference is that Iga has been housebound for a few months and now is starting to be able to move a bit more freely. Larkin is an essential worker and is pulling 12-hour shifts in a call center, talking to people, and really helping to flatten the curve in how we experience this pandemic. And so this kind of leads us into our three guests that we have with us live here. And we're going to start with Courtney. Courtney, do you want to introduce yourself real quick, and then I'll read a little bit about your bio?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Courtney. I graduated from Beloit last spring, excuse me. And I am currently at Johns Hopkins University in their Master's of Entry into Nursing program, which is in Baltimore, Maryland. So I've stayed here throughout the pandemic. Similar to Wisconsin, we have a stay-home order. We also have a curfew at 8 p.m. we're supposed to go home at. And then actually just today, speaking about the masks with the other alumni, we are now required to wear them. It's not an option in our city. So just went to the grocery store today and everybody had their mask on.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So you've been working in the Incident Command Center. and working to distribute PPE throughout the hospital. And so I was wondering, how did you get connected to the Incident Command Center, and what is that work like?
Yeah, so when this all happened, as every other school in the nation has done, we went all online. But we're kind of in a medical hotspot because our school is located right next to Johns Hopkins Hospital, which also has the School of Public Health and the School of Medicine. So we're in kind of a really cool place right now because we have, well, cool relative, obviously. We have a bunch of different perspectives coming in all together. So there are different volunteer opportunities that we got sent through the Hopkins school system. So those opportunities went to the med school, the public health school, as well as the nursing school. And I got connected with Incident Command through that. And so what it is we call it HEIC, which is Hopkins Epidemiology and Incident Command. And it's kind of like the brain of all COVID response for the hospital.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's really, really amazing. Like, so essentially, and for the surrounding hospitals too, because we're doing some really cool research at Hopkins. I mean, Hopkins is doing research, I'm not. And dealing with policies and updating hospital policies for Maryland as the CDC changes, and all of those things are flowing and changing. So my job in Incident Command is I triage all the calls that we get and then send them to the appropriate people to answer the question. So I am in the main headquarters and we get tons of calls. Those come from nurses. A lot of them are from nurses where situations happened on the different units that we have designated to COVID. So they can come from nurses, they come from physicians, they come from anybody in the hospital, as well as community members and other incident commands at the different hospitals in Maryland. And they are, you know, every call you could possibly think of, we have gotten. And then it's my job to log the call, make record of everything, assess the situation, and then direct them to the person that can better answer their question, I guess you could say. So some of the places that we can direct are the Incident Command for COVID. So it's like the emergency COVID team. Some calls get sent straight to them. And then we have like supply chain and visitor requests and all sorts of different things in Nursing Command. So I'm kind of just in charge of triaging and sending everything where it needs to go so the different situations can get handled.
Well, that's interesting. So you said something about visitors. So is that people who want to visit patients in the hospital need to go through a certain amount of screening, or what is that like?
Yeah, so currently at Hopkins, there is a no visitor policy. So nobody is allowed in the hospital unless they are a patient. There are some exceptions. For example, labor and delivery, you can have a visitor, pediatrics sometimes, and all sorts of different situations, but you can't come to appointment like you typically would and bring somebody with you. There has to be an approval process. So anytime somebody wants to enter the hospital that is not here for their own care, they have to get it approved through us. And then Incident Command deals with that, and it either gets accepted or denied. I think they've done a really great job as a hospital accommodating for situations that are really difficult and challenging in themselves. So a lot of EOL or end of life visitor requests happen for whatever reason in the hospital. Not just COVID related. It's a massive hospital and the whole hospital is still functioning. So for EOL, a lot of visitor requests come in so that they can be with their family member.
Well, that's interesting. Ron, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the issues. And of course, either of our other two guests, even though we haven't introduced you yet, you can feel free to chime in as well. But the end of life conversation is one that, or at least I should say, the stories around that we keep hearing. It seems to be one of the most sort of tragic and moving aspects of this entire crisis. Any number of cases in which people, weren't able to say goodbye properly and that sort of thing. I mean, have you all had to deal with some of those more difficult cases, or is it generally just if you check, you can go in and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So I am obviously not the one making the decision if the visitor could come in. I'm just the front line of it. But every day I get at least one call where there's a visitor request for different reasons, but a lot of them are EOLs. And yeah, we get them a lot, and it's really difficult. And it's also really hard, I think, for the people making the decision, because it's just a huge conflict, because especially too, when you think about with COVID, how easily it spread. For example, a family member comes in and they're the visitor request, but they've been living with the family member who is sick. So the odds of the family member coming in also being sick or exposed, there's just a lot of different components, and it's really hard. And I don't know how they do it every day. It's exhausting even just getting the calls and hearing the stories and logging them, let alone making the decisions. So yeah, it's tough.
Wow.
How do you,
most of it, is my mic working okay? The hospitals here mostly have a no visitor policy. And I think it's because those case-by-case decisions are probably so hard, but it is really hard. And colleagues that do hospice and palliative care are now called into the surge team, meaning it's not just ICU level doctors and other, acute care people, but the lethality of the virus is really amazing, especially when people get awfully sick. And we're seeing people using things like iPads and video chats. Patients of mine that are in nursing homes, their family members are very worried that if they take a turn for the worse, or if they were to get sick, they can't go in to visit them. And that's very likely the hard truth of what we're looking at there. Yeah. It's crushing. Yeah.
I mean, there have been a few different reports and articles that have sort of been rushed out, I think, to provide some sort of guidance to hospitals and then to physicians, and particularly to hospitals, though, about how they may want to take this decision away from physicians, right? Instead of putting this on them even more, say, no, this is just the policy and this is just the way it has to be. Because, I mean, as it is, having to go through that, I mean, we can only imagine the level of sort of trauma that's going to leave with so many of our caregivers, right? And Heather, obviously, you're another one of these people who's on the absolute front line of all of this too, right? So this is a difficulty that is going to stay with us for a while as we cope with the aftermath of this virus.
Yeah, I think everybody's what our emotional legacy is going to be from this is going to be very, what your experience was driven. But I think for my own experience, I think we're very nervous about what this is doing to our morale as physicians. And part of that is that we're not used to having a disease that you really don't have any treatment for. We're having hard conversations and don't have a lot to offer you except to hope and watch you and hope that things don't turn worse. And then have those difficult conversations paired with PPE shortages and some sort of, national policymaking chaos. There's a lot, I think there's some deep-seated maybe resentment there that isn't playing out right now. I'm not seeing that among physicians, but I think it's, we'll learn about that next year when the dust settles a little bit.
So since you chimed in here, Rachel, we'll go ahead and just have you, Heather, if you're okay, to just go ahead and introduce. No, don't apologize. I mean, we want the conversation to be organic, so this is totally fine. Please, will you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit here? And if possible, are you able to turn up your mic a little bit or get a little closer to the mic?
I bet I can move it close to me. It's on
Thank
my camera. So
Oh,
that's okay.
Just
Wait,
speak
I
up.
can figure this out. I can do, don't get seasick while I mess with things here for a second.
all right. There we go.
How's that?
Awesome.
A little bit better?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Okay, good. Good. My name's Heather Brislin. I graduated Beloit 2001. I'm from Albuquerque originally, and I'm back home now. I'm an internal medicine. Are you from New Mexico?
That's where I got my PhD at the University of New Mexico.
Oh, awesome. Yes, so I'm in Albuquerque.
Right on.
Except for Beloit, I've been here most of my life. And I now, let's see, I went to medical school and residency here at the university. And I worked at the VA for a while. Then I started my own practice. I have a little geriatrics practice of my own, but I still have a faculty appointment. So I work with colleagues at the university and I still teach at the VA. So since COVID started, I've been sort of in all those different roles. My husband is the one of the residency directors at the university. So he's been pulled in a deeper way to sort of staff planning and how we manage that. So we're both at home most of the time, but working on this from different angles. I'm not in the hospital. I may get called into that role one of these days, but that's my role here.
Well, and I'm wondering, so Courtney is at the very beginning of getting into health care, and you're mid-career at this point. And
yeah.
So I'm wondering from your perspective, so starting with Courtney, how has this changed your perspective of your plans for nursing and what that means? And then Heather, I'd be interested in a reflection, a similar reflection.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I've taken away from this is the change in school, just because that's my like isolated little world that I'm living in now.
Right.
Nursing school's difficult. And then you take, I'm in an accelerated master's program, which is different than an accelerated bachelor's program. So we go very quickly and it's difficult, but I am very eager to get into the field and get working. And I feel really empowered going into this profession as a nurse. And that has come from HEIC because first of all, what a cool table to have a seat at. I mean, I'm like way at the end of the table, but holy cow, that like, I feel so honored to be in that room. Even though I'm triaging phone calls, it is so amazing. But listening to Huddle and the daily review of all COVID in the country, in Maryland, in Hopkins, so frequently, the perspective of the nurse keeps getting brought up. And that has been emphasized because they're really, as well as physicians and everybody else, but the nurses are so involved in this. So I'm really eager to get involved and get going.
Right on.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think that you do get a really interesting perspective, and I'm glad to hear that it's making you even more like mentally ready to move forward with that. That's great.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Heather, how about you?
I don't know. This is very weird. It's weird to have a job for a decade and then have everything turned on its head and try to figure that out. I think when you work in primary care and you work in a place like New Mexico or anywhere, there's a huge primary care shortage, there's a healthcare shortage. We work in a broken system. You're very used to the idea that you're kind of in the trenches, making do with inadequate resources, piecing things together the best that you can. And then this happens and it's so different. Some pieces are familiar, right? How do you get access to people that need it? How do you assess your resources and then plan for what to do with those and how to deploy those in a good way? But it's very foreign to like primary care, for example. Usually we think about ambulatory sensitive conditions, meaning if you have good access to primary care, you shouldn't need hospital resources that much. And so primary care resources get deployed really early. But in this case, primary care really doesn't have much to offer except to be a hotspot of of contagion. And so we're trying to convert everything to video, which with geriatrics is like not a thing, right?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
Right. And so spreading people out, trying to find other avenues to work. I think, Courtney, like you said, there's some fascinating things happening. I start every day by looking at the University of Washington model site, the Johns Hopkins, the JHU tracker, and then our local Department of Health. And those are my three like touchstones. And then you go into your day like a dry sponge. You're so hungry for something to tell you that we're learning something or there's new information. You know so little. And there's something professionally satisfying about that. But also it's exhausting because it's so foreign and hard to figure out what you're supposed to be doing and how to be helpful. I'm eager to do more because I'm in my home office, my dog's on my foot. It doesn't feel like the right move for what all is happening. So
kind of piggybacking off of that, if that's okay. Talking about the shortage and being eager and wanting to get involved more directly as well. Last week, I think it was, the health department in Maryland put out a call to Hopkins nursing students as well as other nursing students for asking if anybody would be willing to step into the clinical setting, and you can apply. And so that just speaks to the shortage, Heather, that you were talking about, and people being eager to join in as well. And I did that. I jumped at that opportunity. I would really like to get involved. And I actually got a call a couple hours ago about a position. It didn't end up being the one for me because it was too far of a commute, but a lot of them are coming from nursing homes that have the virus in the home. And so I will likely end up at one of those because I do have experience in geriatrics. So I will likely go back to geriatrics and work in a nursing home. But the fact that the Department of Maryland, the Health Department of Maryland is calling on nursing students, I think we're a great resource. And I think we have a lot of skills that can be valued, but that just echoes the shortage that you were talking about, that they're already calling upon us to start providing clinical care.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary situation. So sorry, go ahead.
Well, and this gives us an opportunity to kind of make a weird segue, but you've both mentioned shortages of people, shortages of PPE. And so our third guest is Matt Laszlo, and he has an interesting perspective to add. He's not from the healthcare field per se, but has connection to things that I've had shortages of, namely my Clorox wipes.
Going with the orange flavor there.
Yes, the orange flavor, yes. And so Matt, go ahead and introduce yourself and let's add you into the conversation.
All right, thanks. So Matt Laszlo, I'm a class of 92. And one thing I said when I was at Beloit was I knew I wanted nothing to do with science and never wanted to be a doctor. And I couldn't have been more wrong, because for 15 years, from 2005 till 2019, I worked at the Clorox company. And many of those years were in a part of their business focused on pioneering a business in healthcare. So I've been to hundreds of acute care hospitals, long-term care facilities selling the healthcare version of the wipes that Rachel just held up, which are a wide variety of other types of products. And certainly I got a very healthy dipping in microbiology and epidemiology, which turned out was fascinating. And I loved that work and I learned a ton about it. So how wrong was I back in the day? And then one of my stops during those Clorox years was 2009, I think would have been the year. And I was in the cleaning part of the company, managing Clorox disinfecting wipes, those very wipes that Rachel was holding up, through the H1N1 pandemic, and figuring out how do you make sure that you get enough of that product when essentially you're selling every single canister that you make. to the retailers so that you can really touch as many consumers as possible. But that's my work experience and how I fit into this. And now I am the executive in residence at Beloit College. So I teach a course on how to navigate your career. And this spring has been the first time that's been offered. And I also do a lot of coaching and consulting work. And right now I get tons of calls for consulting about consumer behaviors and will they change for the long term when it comes to cleaning and disinfecting at home as a result of this outbreak. Because there are lots of investors who are very curious on how that bet's going to play out.
Yeah, I bet you're right.
So that's some of the stuff I'm involved with now and the perspective I'd come at this from.
Wow.
So interesting.
So I actually have a question. So we were talking, Matt, when we talked about having you come and talk about your experience. Matt actually had me read the back of the canister here to ask a question about are people using their Clorox wipes? This is becoming a Clorox commercial now, apparently. But are people using their Clorox wipes correctly? And Matt pointed something out to me that was interesting, and this is kind of related to behaviors about disinfecting, behaviors about sanitizing, and the ways in which we use these products. And so on the back here, it says, to use to disinfect hard, non-porous surface, you have to wipe the surface to be disinfected, and you have to use enough wipes for treated surface to remain visibly wet for 4 minutes.
Yeah, so Rachel, I'll take it from there. But
Yeah.
So Courtney and Heather, of course, live in this world and they know. And the folks they work with, whether it's environmental services or the infection control nurse, they know that the dwell time of that active ingredient, in the case of what you have is like a quaternary ammonium, that they know that it has to stay wet for a period of time in order to really achieve disinfection, that 5-log reduction. And I'm totally trying to sound like I know about science when I throw that stuff around.
It's working.
You're welcome, everybody. I know I totally had everyone convinced, but now it's over. So, but in the consumer world, that is not talked about at all. So what Rachel just pointed out, and this is not a Clorox specific issue, any disinfecting product, they're going to have different contact times. And one of the things that in the consumer world is not talked about or marketed is how long does it really take and how do you use this product? You just see things like it disinfects. Even the number 99.9%, which you see is, to me, it's not really the whole scientific story. But that's accepted, and it's not that anyone's doing anything wrong or nefarious. But one of the theories I have moving forward is that because this is such a prolonged outbreak and consumers are so consumed with coronavirus and trying to avoid COVID-19, that I think habits are going to change. And you're going to see potentially more marketing awareness driving about the science of disinfecting instead of just very high level things like kills cold and flu. I think you'll start to see also potentially some of the active ingredients that are common in the healthcare settings that maybe Heather that you're seeing or Courtney that you're seeing, things like bleach on wipes, which does not exist today, but is far more efficacious against viruses than the stuff that Rachel, that you were holding up. You may see more hydrogen peroxide come into play. There are even some other chemicals, hypochlorous acid is another offshoot that's wildly effective, but you may see more healthcare or hospital grade disinfectants come into the consumer market because consumers are going to, I believe, start to care more and want to know more, not dissimilar to things you've seen in diet and health and wellness categories. I'm starting to pay more attention to vitamins or supplements, probiotics. People care more and want to know more. I think that could happen more in the disinfecting side as a result of this.
So this brings up a really interesting point and or concern, right? So, okay, so let's say the behavior does change, and I actually am inclined to agree with you. So we end up with an even more sort of focus on sterilizing our environment. There's some sense for me that that might have some unintended consequences. In the case of COVID-19, of course, we want that gone, but there is some concern, right? That if we ideas, thoughts on that. I mean, if this does happen, might we be creating another problem for ourselves?
I mean, for sure. We're just barely learning about the microbiome, right? Both external to your body and internal to your body, and how much of that impacts your health. And there really are a lot of good bacteria out there. It's just kind of this cultural thing, I think. And I don't want to take away from having good products out there and the success of your company. Clorox wipes are worth their weight in gold right now, appropriately. But we don't tend to really look at our own behavior, right? We want to think that there is one thing, there's a product, there's something that will save us if we use it or buy it or own it. And that is like, the strongest disinfectant wipes and things like that. Truthfully, wouldn't it be great if people actually just wash their hands for 20 seconds, yes. Which is another like real eye opener, how long that takes, right? We just stay apart from each other. Not all this like, hydroxychloroquine or whatever the next thing's going to be that people get so excited about. Like, just listen to the messages that you're getting and modify your own behavior in a community. And that's the best we have to hope for right now. It's really hard for folks to get their head around that. But I mean, understandable. We're all doing the best we can.
I guess I'm also wondering about that 20-second hand washing thing. I'm wondering how long is that going to last? Are we actually changing behavior, or are we only changing behavior for a certain amount of time? This is one of the things, Matt, that I thought of when we spoke initially, because the behaviors around disinfecting, I think, cycle during the year. Winter, people have more feelings about needing to kill all of the flu viruses. It's on the top of people's minds. Do you remember, was there a big difference in the need for disinfecting products seasonally?
Yeah, I think so. A couple interesting notes. So being on that focus area when H1N1 broke, massive spike, any hand sanitizer and any disinfecting wipe gone, all sold, and you couldn't make enough to keep up. Yeah. When things calmed down, it went right back to pre-H1N1 levels. Really? I think yeah, it really did. So I think the challenge here, what's different about this is the impact, I think, is much larger, and it's much more prolonged, and the impact on people's everyday lives has them looking at, okay, I don't want to go through this again. Mm-hmm. And so I also think my perception is that there's been probably a lot of misdiagnosis, at least in the early days, of like, oh, I just had a bad cold or a flu, and now I think cold and flu season, as we get back into that in the fall, people will wonder, what do I really have? And this becomes something that's of a much greater magnitude that comes into the mix. So, but I think what ultimately happens is, what it's disinfecting, and really my world was hard surface disinfecting. So really all you're going to look at, and a little bit of hand sanitization there too, is you're looking at probabilities. Like, what can I do that maybe prevents something with a little more certainty? And that's where I think the interest around surface disinfecting may grow. But I think ultimately what consumers at home will do is they will default back to what's convenient. Yeah. So I don't see people like, I have jugs of bleach and I'm filling a mop bucket and I'm wiping everything down every day. They might be doing more of that now, but they're not going to do that at home in the future. They're going to fall back to what's convenient. And I do think hand washing, to your point, is one of those things that may go by the wayside. And that could be a real problem.
Because it's inconvenient. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's the 20 seconds, Heather, exactly. And and I think people, this is more gut feel than fact, but what I observe is that people view hand washing as I'm killing it. And it's really, to me, it's about mechanically removing.
Yes. Yeah.
And so therefore, how do you lather up, and do you really get all the surfaces? And I don't think that's thought about. And when you think about the way people wash their hands, and then I'm going to put a contact lens in, and like that's those little things, you're like, boom, you just
gives me indigestion. Just
I know, but I don't think the average consumer, they think they did an adequate job
Right.
And they clearly they don't. So.
Well, and Ron, to your point, I'm generally sensitive about not over sterilizing the environment, but this virus is very weird and novel for some weird things, right? I mean, it is very contagious and super durable, and the asymptomatic transmission period seems to be pretty profound. Just like passes around, you have no idea it's there. We really do have sort of an invisible enemy right now, and I. Just from my own same kind of a gut feeling, but Gestalt that thought is that using a lot of hand sanitizer and protective sort of cleaning habits until we probably have a vaccine. So probably, until this time next year is a decent plan and probably the right thing to do, even though it kind of feels bad to think we're wiping out everything. But
yeah.
One other thing that could be particularly interesting is, since it's so airborne and can hang in the air for a while, is what technology is out there that could take care of and neutralize the virus while it's in the air, because there's really no solution for that. I'm talking about ones on surface. We're talking about ones as well on skin, but in the air, it's particularly, you can't see it and it's out there. You could see some of the technology that's out there around ultraviolet light.
Yeah.
I have to wonder if you'll see more things like that put in more public places, because a lot of what we're talking about too are just removing it for a split second in time, but it can be reinfected right after you've disinfected a surface. So that's the other, I think, flaw in thinking that somehow disinfecting or sterilizing will somehow do the job permanently. It won't.
Well, I think that's an interesting point, right? Because, after we think about after 9/11, one of the things that I noticed almost sort of immediately is all of these places, first of all, there were no trash cans anywhere anymore for like a long time, right?
Oh, right.
Yeah, you're right. It's just one of those things like you go, oh, wait, I can't, wait a minute. What happened to the trash cans? So there was that, right? But then also you see this change that happened with all of a sudden everyone is having to go through this extensive security. And my sense is that maybe either institutions or corporations will likely also be the ones that end up doing that, introducing those technologies that are sort of passively cleaning the air in a way, and we just have to get used to, okay, there's a new machine there, right? And of course, then having to worry about if there are any unintended health consequences to those as well. But again, my sense is that those are the organizations that are going to take the lead in this, right? I mean, I think I agree with the general consensus here is that probably, after a little bit, people will be like, oh yeah, okay, I think it's all right. Okay, I'm not going to really wash my hands like that anymore and that sort of thing. I mean, I even think about those, when you go to the grocery store, there are all these sort of ubiquitous stands with the
cart wipes,
right? Okay. And now again, after I think H1N1 or something like that hit, there were no wipes in them, right? You'd go there and you're like, okay, it's empty. And of course, then over time, you see that you could just pull through as many as you like. And I mean, not that I did that, but you could conceivably pull through as many as you like. They were totally full. And now, of course, they're empty again, right? And so, but I think the fundamental thing is that wasn't left up to people to install that, right? And now we're starting to see like plastic barriers between cashiers, for example, cashiers and the customers, something that probably should have been in place a long time ago, right? So things like that are probably going to be in there, or little pieces of technology will be there. But anyway, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I would. Oh, no, go ahead, Courtney, please.
Some of the calls that we get in HEIC actually quite frequently is when they transport a PUI, which is a patient under investigation. So that's somebody that has been tested for COVID because they are displaying symptoms, or there's a whole algorithm for who gets a test. But when they transport a PUI, say that test result came back positive, and now they need to be transferred to a COVID unit, to a negative pressure room. Sanitizing the room's a big discussion. And I can't speak to it like I'm an expert, but we do have the UV lights that you're talking about. And there's a whole team that's responsible for the sanitation process. And they are these massive UV lights, like larger than me. And there's numerous ones that go into the room and they have to sanitize for a certain amount of time. And there's all sorts of different procedures too. And again, like, don't quote me because I'm not that team, so I don't want to be like speaking out of my scope of practice here, but I've seen them being like rolled down the hallway, and these are just these massive things. And they sanitize a room, and we have a whole team that does it now at the hospital because so many patients are coming in.
I think that it's going to be interesting for you as you move through your nursing program and you move into the hospital to be thinking about this concept of infection control. And to think about how you as a nurse actively participate in that process, because there are teams, right, of people who do this because it's so important, but also it is an individual, it's something that has to be taken care of on an individual level too.
Yeah. To speak to that, we have safety officers in our hospital. So every COVID positive floor, or a unit that has been converted to a COVID positive floor, they have safety officers to aid in the donning of PPE. And that PPE is personal protective equipment. And we went through a training as our online clinical a couple weeks ago on how to don the gear. We've already had sign-offs on it, so we know, but the regulations have changed. But it's amazing how every time a nurse or a physician or a doctor goes into a patient's room, the equipment that they need to do that. And then too, that goes back to surface sanitizing, because we are reusing PPE because there's such a shortage. So we are sanitizing surfaces with all sorts of, we used to have wipes, but wipes are very low now. So it's spray and bucket and paper towels and buckets. But one of the big discussions is how are we sanitizing a PAPR hood? And the PAPR hood is that big white thing that you put on your head that's connected to a tube that goes down your back and connected to a battery fanny pack, let's say. It's a motor, and it's a positive air pressure ventilator or respirator, excuse me, wrong COVID breathing term. And so it blows air out so that you have constant positive pressure in your hair your head, that way the virus or other things can't go in. But those are being reused because it's an extreme shortage. So how do we clean the PAPR hood? It's just a whole conversation. And so, and Rachel, right when this started, I had a conversation with a girl on the soccer team about your class that we had together, and one of my favorite classes still to this day. And we were talking about all the vectors, everything's a vector. And it's amazing when you think about trying to control it in a hospital, because you're donning 2 to 3 layers of gloves and then sanitizing those gloves and then throwing them away and then getting a new pair. But we are going through so much PPE that we're just making a bunch of little vectors, and then somebody comes and takes the trash, and then that has to get disposed of. And so containing it is it's just mind-boggling.
I would think that this really is so unprecedented. I mean, Heather, you mentioned too the lack of PPE, and from my friends and colleagues in the nursing and medical fields, I've heard of recommendations for reusing gloves and masks a certain amount of times. I'm a sewer and crafter, and so on the crafty blogs, I've been reading about calls for fabric masks that they can put in a filter so that they can be reused, and because there's not enough N95s and all of that. And I think that it's my hope that we have a better stock in the future, but that's got to really be difficult for people who are used to this idea that you have the PPE that provides some protection to you and the patient, and now that's broken down. So there
are several pillars of an outbreak or infectious disease care that we took for granted. And you on the PPE side, you used to see a patient with tuberculosis and put your N95 mask on, and the N95 respirator is, you know, it takes, I don't know, somebody else on the call, I think it's 4 microns is the small, you know, the size filtration that it lets out. They're very hard to breathe through. They're super uncomfortable. And you would put that on every year. You get tested to make sure you know how to wear it without any air leaks. And then you see the patient and you just throw it away like you're an N95 millionaire. Never think about it again. and then, you know, I have physician friends in New York City who were given 1 N95 mask per week to wear for their entire shift and then keep and reuse because the filter, and you have to be so careful about the invisible force field between the inside of the mask and the outside of the mask and what you might be exposing yourself to. We really do think, you know, the boundary between what's a droplet transmitted versus airborne, right? How long does it stay in the air and how small is it is really kind of an arbitrary line that we draw, except that it determines what kind of PPE is necessary to prevent infection. And it really does seem like if you are not sticking a big swab down somebody's throat and causing them to cough because you're performing a test right then, or intubating someone, or a bronchial alveolar lavage is actually like a tube that, you know, forces some fluids so they can get a good sample out of the inside of your lungs. If you're not doing one of those fairly invasive procedures and you're pristine about PPE, then it's okay to just have a surgical mask, the paper mask with little ear loops, you know, just a physical barrier against literal bits of spray. Eye protection's super important. And we can do that ritual. Courtney, have you seen the There's No Emergency in a Pandemic essay? Just because it's a nursing sort of thing. It's a really profound essay about, it came out of Ebola. I mean, you know, if we're talking about Ebola precautions, things are pretty bad. So, but the idea that it doesn't matter how desperate the circumstances in front of you, you find your buddy, you put your PPE on appropriately, you take the time that it takes to protect yourself, not because healthcare workers are more important humans, but because their skills are needed to be a force multiplier to take care of lots of different people down the road. And you can't be cavalier about that. So just like one of those pillars of, you know, infection is, or medical care is being good about your healthcare worker resources and your PPE resources. And right now, not having PPE feels really bad. We're looking at, it looks like states that have more testing. New Mexico's actually got a lot of tests, and I don't know how we pulled that off. We have almost nothing, you know, I mean, we're a lot of shortage, but we've been doing great at tests. And but it looks like the rate of infections that are just healthcare workers, and oftentimes those are janitorial staff or like health techs in nursing homes and outside of hospital settings, but it's like 10% of the infections is really among healthcare workers, which means something's not working right in that system. We can't burn through our healthcare workers. That's not going to work either. And then I'm sorry, just the other big piece that's missing is that testing thing. You know, epidemiology works. Public health is its own field, independent from acute care, face-to-face healthcare, that is really crucial. And they've just been hamstrung by not having the ability to test and trace. It's been very hard to know what to do. That's why we had to, you know, lock ourselves in boxes and not cough on anyone. That's the next most extreme plan if you can't figure it out any other way.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right.
I have, on top of working in HEIC, I've been a PPE distributor throughout the hospital. So,
You're like
and
Santa.
that has been, I am Santa. I mean, I'm not the people that are making them are, and I feel like the nurses that are working in these units are. I feel like I'm just the messenger, but it is honestly quite terrifying knowing the resources that we have in comparison to what they usually do. So as a PPE runner, how it works is, especially in the ICUs, is they'll put in an order to central command, and they'll say, I want 7 tubs of wipes because we're out, and etc. So on a specific floor, I'll get a cart, and then I'm in the sub basement. It's quite cool. I got lost once, but I didn't even know we had a sub basement, but it's a little scary. But I'll run up to a floor and I go into the ICU, I deliver the PPE, and then I get out as fast as possible because they don't want extra personnel in the ICUs. Frankly, if I'm not providing care either, like, I'm happy to be in there to help when I need to be, but if I'm not needed, I get the heck out. So, but it's quite scary because some of the ICU floors will be order 6 Papper hoods and 2 bottles of hand sanitizer and 4 bleach wipes, and I'll come up with 2 Papper hoods, 1 tub of bleach wipes, and a small pump hand sanitizer. And they're like, well, this isn't what I ordered. This is what we need. And the answer is, we don't have any to give, which is quite scary and also stressful for those units too, because like you said, we need to keep our healthcare workers safe as well as everybody else, but especially our healthcare workers, because they are called upon when people need help that are really sick. So it's really difficult to not have that gear. And also it brings about a lot of anxiety in the unit as well, for those nurses and doctors that are working with these patients that don't have the proper gear. And one last thing, in HEIC, we have a specific phone line and a center designated to our employees who are sick. So we have an entire line designated to, we got so many calls, there's an entire center now designated to dealing with employees who are sick, who need tests, who need time off because they're positive, etc. So it just is a really difficult time with that.
So we are unfortunately at the very end of our time, and given that this is an alumni episode, first of all, thank you so much to all of you for sharing your experience. This has been really fascinating to hear, and on some level quite gut-wrenching to hear about, of course. But we're very thankful that we get to call you a part of the Beloit family. And so since this is an alumni episode, and we're hoping that we've got some current and prospective students in the audience, just as a closing, I'd love to hear from you about how you see what you're doing right now connecting to what you did at Beloit. And so let's go from most distant. So we'll go Matt, Heather, and then Courtney in order of graduation.
Okay, all right. So I'll lead off. All right, so so something I'll say that I took away from my Beloit College experiences, I had so many opportunities at Beloit to get involved in things that I had interest in and I didn't know anything about. And I embraced that. And even though I joked with you all earlier about, well, I know I don't want to be a doctor, be in healthcare, because I wound up in it quite accidentally, but because of the confidence I got from getting involved in all sorts of different things and leadership roles at Beloit College, it gave me the confidence to pioneer a healthcare business at Clorox that now pretty much every hospital, they're using wipes that I held the very first one when we started it. So that confidence came from my experiences at Beloit.
Excellent. Thank you. Heather.
I feel very much the same. My degree at Beloit was in world history. And then I went on to medical school, and having just the opportunity to spread yourself really wide and take advantage of lots of different things. I feel like I have a skill set that just gives you confidence to take on weird problems or think new things. So UNM called and asked, because they're busy, could I write up the protocol for how to manage social distancing in a homeless shelter of 500 people sleeping 3 feet apart. We've got to come up with a new plan. And I didn't know anything about homeless care specifically, except that you get this idea, I think, from a foundation at a place like Beloit, that like I could figure that out. I need a couple days. I'm gonna just like call a bunch of different people and read a bunch of things and figure it out. And I love that. It's been great for my career to feel like I could do a bunch of different stuff, and I think that's where that came from.
The flexibility, I think, that comes with a liberal arts degree cannot be undervalued. I mean, it's amazing. And Courtney, 1 year out.
Yeah, 1 year out, almost 1 year out. One thing that I really value is communication and group work. Rachel, every time we had to fill out our expectation sheet at the beginning of the day, where it's like, how am I going to contribute to our emerging diseases group? I was just like, man, this again, come on, like we do this every day. But my first thought when I walked into HEIC, they were having a really heated discussion. I was like, they didn't fill out their expectation sheet because they're not working together right now. But just learning group work and how to communicate and navigate with a bunch of different styles of working, and people and styles, and that has been really valuable because this is all forces together. We have to conquer this. We have to go at it together, and having that skill set of working with people and communicating with all sorts of different people, I feel really prepared to tackle any task that presents in front of me.
Excellent.
Well, I'm always happy to hear that the group work thing comes through. Students who have been in my classes know that group work is a real important part of what I do in my classrooms, and I want to help you be better at it. So yeah, it's great to hear that. So, well, Ron, any parting words from you?
Yeah, I mean, this is part of, first of all, this was just an amazing opportunity to meet three people who I had not previously met. And each of you in your own way are doing sort of amazing work in this extraordinary situation that we're in. And so first, I want to thank you all for joining us. And, you know, even though you're right, Rachel, some of what we heard is a bit hard to hear, right? I am very much left hopeful by the fact that, one, we're all here, all in different parts of the country, but all united in this fight, as Courtney has rightly put it, right? We're all in this together. And it sort of heartens me to see that our alums are out there making a difference, and still making the time to come back and talk to us. So again, much love to all of you. And I hope that our audience got as much from this as I did.
Well, thank you again to all of you. Thank you to Larkin and Iga. We're going to try and edit, maybe see if we can get those videos in the saved version of this, because they had some really great things to say. And so thank you to everybody who joined us today on Facebook. And we'll be back on the Beloit College Facebook page next Wednesday with our regular normal episodes. So thank you again, and we'll see you again soon.